The cardboard box wasn't heavy. That was the worst part. 11 years of my father's life. The man who built 3 businesses from nothing, who worked through 2 recessions without flinching, who once told me that a person's worth was measured in what they left behind, and everything he chose to give me fit inside a single medium-sized cardboard box. My brother carried the other boxes to his car. Big ones. I watched from the driveway of my father's house. My brother's house now, technically, as of 47 minutes ago when the attorney finished reading, and I counted. 6 boxes, a rolled-up Persian rug, the antique clock from the study that I used to wind every Sunday morning when I was small enough to need a step stool to reach it. I didn't say anything. I had learned a long time ago that saying things didn't help much. The attorney, a soft-spoken man named Gerald with wire-rimmed glasses, had cleared his throat twice before reading my portion of the will. I remember thinking that throat-clearing twice meant something, like he was preparing himself. My brother received the house. 4 bedrooms, renovated kitchen, half an acre in Maplewood, New Jersey. Market value, Gerald told us without making eye contact, approximately $740,000. My brother also received the investment portfolio, managed fund, conservative allocation, current balance $312,000. My brother received the car, a 3-year-old Volvo in slate gray that still smelled like my father's aftershave. I received the laundromat, not the building. My father leased the building. I received the business itself, 12 aging washing machines, 9 dryers, a change machine that jammed if you looked at it wrong, and a lease with 14 months remaining at $30,200 a month. Gerald slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward me. The last quarterly statement showed a net profit of $1,840. My brother looked at his phone while Gerald read my portion. He didn't even try to hide it. Afterward, outside on the sidewalk, he put a hand on my shoulder. He smelled like the cologne he'd been wearing since college, the expensive kind, the kind my father used to buy him as birthday gifts while I got practical things like toolkits and savings bonds. "You know he always respected how independent you are," my brother said. He was nodding while he said it, the slow, solemn nodding of someone performing sincerity for an invisible audience. This is probably his way of honoring that. I looked at him for a moment. "He gave you a $740,000 house," I said. "Rachel." He said my name the way people say it when they want you to stop making them uncomfortable. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He left 20 minutes later with his boxes and his rug and the clock I used to wind on Sunday mornings. I sat in my car in front of my father's house for a long time. The hydrangeas along the front walk were blooming. Dusty blue, my father's favorite, the ones he replanted every spring. I thought about the fact that I was the one who drove him to the nursery to buy them. My brother was busy that weekend. My brother was always busy. I drove to the laundromat because I didn't know where else to go. It was on Clement Street, tucked between a Vietnamese sandwich shop and a cell phone repair place with a handwritten sign in the window. The sign above the door read, sparkling clean in letters that had once been red and were now the particular shade of faded pink. That means something has been there a long time and nobody has tended to it. A bell above the door announced me when I walked in. The machines hummed. 3 customers, a teenager with headphones, an older woman folding towels with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times, and a man in paint-stained jeans reading a paperback. Nobody looked up. I walked through to the back, past the change machine and the vending unit with the single-serve detergent packets, and found the small room my father had apparently used as an office. A metal folding chair. A desk that was really just a door laid across 2 filing cabinets. A whiteboard with a weekly schedule written in blue marker, employee initials next to each shift. An electric kettle still plugged in. I sat in the metal folding chair. My father had sat in this chair. I looked at the whiteboard schedule, at his handwriting, the square, careful capital letters he'd used my whole life, and I felt something move through my chest that I couldn't quite name. Not grief, exactly. Grief was something I'd been carrying for the 8 months since his diagnosis. The 6 months since it became clear the treatments weren't working. The 3 weeks since I sat beside his hospital bed and watched him breathe with increasing difficulty and held his hand and told him I wasn't angry, even though I didn't know yet that I would need to say that to myself over and over after he was gone. This was something smaller and sharper than grief. This was confusion. My father was not a careless man. He was not a man who did things without intention. He had built and sold a landscaping company by the time he was 35. He put both of us through college. He'd managed his own medical care for 8 months with the same organized deliberateness he brought to everything, researching his options, keeping color-coded folders, never once losing track of a document or a deadline. He did not accidentally leave his daughter a failing laundromat. I opened the top drawer of the left-hand filing cabinet. Folders, labeled in that same careful handwriting. Utility bills. Lease documents. Equipment maintenance logs. Employee records. 2 part-time employees, both apparently reliable, noted with small check marks next to their names. I went through them slowly, not sure what I was looking for. The second drawer held more of the same. The third drawer was locked. I found the key in an empty coffee mug on the desk. The mug had a faded logo from a 5K race I vaguely remembered, my father running the year I turned 12. The key was taped to the inside bottom with a small strip of masking tape, as if he'd left it for someone who would think to look, as if he'd left it for someone who knew how he thought. The third drawer contained one folder. It was thick. I lifted it out and set it on the desk and opened it, and then I sat very still for a moment, because the first page was a letter. Handwritten. My name at the top. Rachel, if you're reading this, Gerald has done his job and you've found your way here, which means you're already doing better than you think you are. I know what today looked like from the outside. I know what your brother's face looks like when Gerald read the will, and I know what yours looked like too, though I hope I'm wrong about the second part. I hope you held it together, because you always hold it together, and that has always been both your greatest strength and the thing I most regret not protecting better. There are things in this folder that require your attention. Read everything before you do anything. That was always the advice you ignored the least, so I'm giving it to you one more time. I love you. I should have said that more clearly, more often, in ways that didn't require you to decode them. That is my failure, not yours. Dad. My hands were shaking slightly. I set the letter down and looked at the rest of the folder's contents. The second document was a property deed, not for the laundromat building which my father leased. For a different property, a commercial building on Hargrove Avenue, 4,200 square feet, purchased 14 years ago for $180,000. Current assessed value, according to a printout clipped to the deed, $1.1 million. My father owned a building. He had owned it for 14 years and he had never mentioned it, not once. Not to me, not based on the complete confusion of the next several documents, to anyone except his attorney. The laundromat on Clement Street was a tenant in one of the building's smaller commercial units. There were 3 other units, all occupied, all paying rent. The rent ledger, meticulous as everything else my father had ever produced, showed a monthly income of $14,600. After the mortgage, paid off 2 years ago, there was the final statement to prove it. The property generated $14,600 a month. I read that number 4 times. Behind the rent ledger was a business summary, clearly prepared for someone who would need to be walked through what they were inheriting. Each tenant, their lease terms, their payment history, notes on the building's condition, a new roof in 2019, HVAC serviced annually, electrical updated 3 years ago. A contact card for the property management company my father had used with a handwritten note. They are good. Trust them to start. Learn it yourself over time. Behind the business summary was a single printed spreadsheet. It showed the building's estimated annual income, projected over 10 years at a conservative growth rate, with a column for taxes and maintenance already factored in. Over 10 years, the property was projected to generate $1.4 million in net income. I sat in the metal folding chair in my father's small back office while the washing machines hummed on the other side of the wall. And I didn't cry, because I was somewhere beyond crying, somewhere very quiet and very clear. A place I'd only been a few times in my life. My father had left me a fortune. He had hidden it inside something that looked like nothing. I thought about my brother's face during the reading of the will, the barely concealed satisfaction, the way he'd checked his phone, the way he'd explained to me on the sidewalk outside that my father had been honoring my independence. I thought about all the weekends I'd spent helping my father manage his properties over the years, though I hadn't known they were his. I'd thought he was helping a friend. He used to ask me to come along, said it was good to understand how buildings worked, how leases worked, how a leases worked, how a landlord's responsibilities were structured. My brother was always busy on those weekends. I thought about the Sunday mornings winding the clock. I thought about the hydrangeas. My father was not a careless man. He had spent 14 years teaching me, quietly and without announcement, exactly what I would need to know. I didn't call my brother that night. I went home to my apartment, which was small and needed new windows, and I sat at my kitchen table with my father's folder laid out in front of me. I read everything twice, the way he'd suggested. Then I called the property management company and introduced myself. The woman who answered, a businesslike person named Donna, said, "Oh, you're Walter's daughter. He told us to expect your call. He said you'd probably call within 24 hours. He talked about me," I said, and my voice did something I hadn't expected. "He talked about you all the time," Donna said, her voice gentling slightly. "I'm very sorry for your loss. He was a good man to work with, very organized." "Yes," I said. "He was." I spent the next 2 weeks learning. Donna was patient. The tenants were, for the most part, easy to communicate with. There was a dentist's office in the largest unit. They had been there for 9 years and their lease had 3 years remaining. A small accounting firm. A physical therapy clinic. The laundromat, which I began visiting every few days, sitting in the back office, getting comfortable with the rhythms of a place that was smaller and more human than anything else my father had left behind. The 2 employees, a woman in her 50s named Carol and a college student named Pete, were efficient and good-natured. Carol had worked there for 6 years. She moved through the space with the quiet authority of someone who knows every machine's particular personality. "Your dad used to come in on Thursday mornings," she told me one afternoon. "He'd check the machines, ask if anything needed ordering, have coffee from the kettle in the back. He always brought the good stuff, not the cheap kind." "He did?" I said. "Mm-hmm." She folded a shirt someone had left behind with neat, practiced movements. "He'd ask about my granddaughter, remember things, remembered her name, her school, her soccer games." She looked at me. "He was a man who paid attention." I nodded. I was beginning to understand that my father had been paying attention to everything for a very long time. My brother called on a Thursday about 3 weeks after the reading of the will. He'd heard things. I wasn't sure how. Maybe Gerald had said something, or maybe the property records were findable if you went looking, and his voice had a particular quality I recognized. The quality of a person recalibrating. "I just want to understand the situation," he said. He used his reasonable voice, the one he used in work meetings. Dad apparently had a commercial property, a pretty significant one from what I can tell. "Yes," I said, "and he left it to you." "He left the laundromat business to me. The property was structured separately, for estate planning reasons, I think." I had, in fact, spent considerable time understanding exactly how my father had structured it, with the help of an estate attorney I'd hired. Gerald handled it properly. Silence on the line. "Rachel," my brother said, "don't you think this is something we should discuss as a family?" I looked out my window. The evening light was doing something soft and golden over the rooftops. My father used to call that kind of light the good hour. "I think Dad discussed it," I said carefully. "I think he made his decision. He wasn't well at the end. He was perfectly clear at the end." My voice was steady. "He planned this for 14 years. The documents are dated. Everything is legal and in order. Gerald can confirm all of this." Another silence. "I just feel like," my brother started. "I know," I said. "I felt something similar for about 2 hours, sitting in a parking lot after the reading, and then I went to the laundromat." I paused. "You could have come with us on those Saturdays. Dad asked you." "Several times." He didn't say anything for a moment. "I didn't know they were important," he said finally. I didn't either, I said. That was kind of the point. We stayed on the phone for a little while longer, and it wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't cruel either. I had spent a lot of time thinking about what I wanted from this. I had decided I didn't want to reduce my brother to rubble. He wasn't a malicious person. He was a person who had chosen convenience over presence, again and again, for many years without fully understanding what he was choosing. That was its own kind of consequence to live with. I didn't need to add to it. What I needed was to understand what my father had given me, not just the property, not just the income, but the lesson wrapped around all of it. He had watched both of his children for decades. He had seen who showed up and who didn't, who learned and who assumed they already knew, who paid attention to the small things, the machines that needed maintenance, the tenants who deserved a fast response, the employees who worked Thursdays and remembered that coffee mattered. He had structured his estate accordingly. And he had done it with enough care, enough legal precision, enough documented intention that it couldn't be challenged. Not because he wanted to wound my brother, but because he wanted it to stand. 6 months later, I renewed the lease on the Clement Street location at a slightly higher rate, fair market, nothing punitive, and used part of the first quarter's income to repaint the sparkling Celine sign. True red this time, visible from the corner. Carol's granddaughter played in a soccer tournament in October, and I went to one of the games. Carol seemed surprised when I showed up, then unsurprised in the way of a person who has decided to revise their expectations upward. I bought a small condo. My windows no longer needed replacing. My brother and I had dinner once on a neutral Tuesday in November. He was quieter than usual. At one point, over pasta he'd chosen from a menu he studied too carefully, he said, "Dad was always harder to read than I gave him credit for." He was easy to read, I said, not unkindly. You just had to be there. He nodded. He accepted that. I gave him credit for that. The hydrangeas at my father's old house, my brother's house, were probably still there along the front walk. I hoped whoever was tending them knew to cut them back in the fall. My father always said most people pruned too late and then wondered why the blooms were small. You had to pay attention. You had to do the thing even when nobody was watching and there was no obvious reward for doing it and something more comfortable was available instead. He said that. He said it in the back office of a laundromat on a Thursday morning, drinking good coffee, asking about a little girl's soccer games. He said it in 14 years of Saturday mornings that looked like nothing. I heard him,